6:17 AM Taiwan Standard Time. The Taiwan Strait at first light runs southeast to northwest under a high-pressure system that is held for 4 days. Sea state 2, visibility unlimited, wind at 8 knots from the north. On a clear morning, the Taiwanese coastline is visible from the mainland shore. On a clear morning, what is moving on the water is visible to everyone watching. On this morning, a great deal was moving on the water, and a great deal was watching. 72 hours earlier, the People's Liberation Army Navy had announced the commencement of what its Eastern Theater Command designated a Maritime Security Zone, a formalized exclusion corridor surrounding Taiwan's principal ports and extending 200 nautical miles into the Philippine Sea and the South China Sea. The zone was not legally recognized by any nation outside the People's Republic of China. It was enforced by 14 PLAN surface combatants, 4 Type 093 attack submarines holding position across the eastern approaches, and a continuous H-6J maritime patrol presence that had been logging contact positions of every vessel within 300 nautical miles of the island for 68 consecutive hours. The Maritime Security Zone had been in effect for 68 hours when the last commercial tanker capable of carrying refined petroleum products had cleared the 200 nautical mile boundary. Taiwan's strategic petroleum reserve stood at 31 days at normal consumption. At wartime consumption rates, elevated electricity demand, vehicle fuel prioritization, industrial generators running continuously, that figure compressed to 19 days. 19 days was not a timeline that permitted a prolonged diplomatic resolution. It was a timeline that required a decision. The decision had been made at 11 p.m. the previous evening in a secure conference that included the U.S. President, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and Indopacom's commander. The decision was not to conduct a retaliatory strike against PLAN military assets. The decision was to conduct a freedom of navigation operation of sufficient military weight to make the Maritime Security Zone's enforcement untenable. To break the blockade not through diplomacy, but through the physical presence of U.S. naval power in waters the PLAN was claiming the authority to close. This was operationally different from every other scenario in this framework in one fundamental respect. The United States was not responding to an attack. It was initiating a confrontation. The legal basis was freedom of navigation under UNCLOS. The operational basis was carrier power projection. The political basis was a treaty commitment and 19 days of petroleum reserve. The risk calculus was unlike any other scenario because the U.S. would be moving into a prepared defensive posture rather than responding to an adversary who had committed its forces to an attack profile. The PLAN would be defending. The U.S. would be advancing. The carrier strike group had been holding position 380 nautical miles east of Taiwan for 44 hours, beyond the DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missiles assessed maximum engagement range of approximately 1,500 kilometers. The distance had been deliberate, close enough to demonstrate commitment, far enough to avoid presenting the PLAN with an unambiguous high-value target during the diplomatic phase. The diplomatic phase had concluded at 11 p.m. At 6:17 a.m., the carrier began its western transit. Speed, 28 knots. Bearing, 285 degrees. Course, the center of the Taiwan Straits International Waters Corridor, 24 nautical miles from the closest point of the Taiwanese coast, 38 nautical miles from the nearest point of the mainland's territorial baseline. The PLAN's Eastern Theater Command detected the carrier group's course change within 4 minutes through its over-the-horizon radar network and its Type 094 submarine's passive sonar signature analysis. The course change was unambiguous. A carrier group transiting at 28 knots on bearing 285 was not a repositioning maneuver. It was a statement of intent with a 28-knot emphasis. The Eastern Theater Command transmitted a warning to navigation at 6:24 a.m., declaring the carrier group to be in violation of the Maritime Security Zone and demanding an immediate course reversal. The carrier group's flag bridge received the transmission, logged it, and maintained course and speed. No response was transmitted. The absence of a response was itself the response. The plan's reaction timeline from that moment forward had been wargamed extensively by Indopacom. The wargame consensus had identified 3 probable plan responses in ascending order of escalation: a close approach harassment by plan surface combatants, a submarine positioning maneuver designed to place a Type 093 inside torpedo range, or a DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missile launch from pre-surveyed positions in Fujian Province. The wargame had assessed the first 2 as certain, the third as conditional on the plan's assessment of U.S. escalation intent. The wargame had not assessed what happened next as the base case. It had assessed it as the high-end scenario. The plan executed the high-end scenario. At 6:41 a.m., 17 minutes after the carrier group maintained course against the warning to navigation, the Plan Eastern Theater Command authorized a coordinated response. 4 DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missiles from pre-surveyed positions near Fuzhou in Fujian Province, simultaneous activation of the Type 093 submarines in their prepared torpedo engagement positions, and a surface interdiction maneuver by 6 Type 052D destroyers and 2 Type 055 cruisers that had been holding position in the Northern Strait. All 3 elements activating at 6:41 a.m. The DF-21D launches were detected by the space-based infrared system at 6:41 a.m. The alert reached the carrier's Tactical Flag Command Center at 6:42 a.m. The Type 093 submarine activation, the moment at which passive sonar contacts shifted from stationary acoustic profiles to active maneuvering signatures, had been detected by the P-8 Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft maintaining station 140 nautical miles south of the group at 6:39 a.m., 2 minutes before the DF-21D launch. The P-8's tactical coordinator had flagged the signature changes and transmitted the contact report. By the time the DF-21D alert arrived, the carrier group already knew it was inside a submarine engagement envelope. This was the operational reality of the Taiwan Strait that made it categorically different from the Persian Gulf or the Red Sea. The U.S. was advancing into a prepared position. The plan had had 68 hours to place its assets exactly where it wanted them. The submarines were already in position. The surface combatants were already at battle stations. The DF-21D targeting solutions had been pre-calculated against the carrier group's 6:17 a.m. position and were being updated continuously as the group transited west. Every plan asset in the theater was tracking a target it had been assigned for days. None of the friction of hasty positioning, none of the degraded readiness of a force caught in garrison. The plan was fighting from a setup position of its own construction. The carrier group knew this. Every element of the approach had been planned against the assumption that the plan would fight from prepared positions. The anti-submarine warfare package that had been operating ahead of the group since 4 a.m., 3 SH-60R, Seahawk helicopters in active dipping sonar patterns, 2 Mk-54 torpedo-armed aircraft, a Virginia-class submarine running at periscope depth 18 nautical miles ahead of the group on the projected approach corridor, had been placing the Type 093 submarines in a tracking geometry specifically designed to ensure they could not approach torpedo release range undetected. The geometry had worked. The P-8 contact report confirmed it. The Type 093s were tracked. They were being tracked when they activated. The DF-21D engagement was the most time-critical element. 4 missiles from Fuzhou. Flight time to the carrier group's current position, approximately 11 minutes. 11 minutes from launch to terminal phase. The carrier group's Aegis network had been configured for exactly this engagement since the transit began at 6:17 a.m. SM-3 Block 2. A batteries on 2 destroyers and the cruiser pre-assigned to DF-21D threat axis coverage. Targeting solutions preloaded against the Fujian Province DF-21D, launch coordinates that had been cataloged and updated for 31 months. The SM-3 engagements began at 6:47 a.m. as the DF-21D missiles reached mid-course phase. 3 of the 4 were intercepted in mid-course above the atmosphere. Clean kinetic engagements against predictable ballistic trajectories. The 4th DF-21D executed a mid-course maneuver at 6:49 a.m. A trajectory adjustment the plan had incorporated into its latest DF-21D operational variant to complicate mid-course intercept geometry. The SM-3 intercept vehicle adjusted within its correction envelope. It missed by 22 meters. The DF-21D continued on its adjusted trajectory into terminal phase. SM-6 dual-mode interceptors from the cruiser engaged the terminal phase track at 6:51 a.m. The first SM-6 achieved proximity parameters. The DF-21D's guidance system was severed. The re-entry vehicle continued on an unguided ballistic trajectory and impacted the ocean 31 nautical miles east of the carrier's current position. It had been targeted on the carrier's 6:41 a.m. position, not its 6:51 a.m. position. 10 minutes of 28-knot transit had moved the carrier 8.7 nautical miles from where the missile's terminal guidance had last been updated. Speed was a defensive measure. The carrier group had used it. The Type 093 submarines required a different response architecture. The 2 contacts that the P-8 had been tracking, both assessed as having maneuvered into firing positions within 15 nautical miles of the group's projected track, received Mk-54 lightweight torpedoes from the SH-60R Seahawk helicopters at 6:44 a.m. before the submarines had achieved firing solutions of their own. The timing was deliberate and precise. The P-8's contact report at 6:39 a.m. had given the ASW package 6 minutes to develop firing solutions against the submarines before the submarines could complete their own targeting cycles against the carrier. 6 minutes was the operational margin. The first Mk-54 engagement achieved a confirmed tracking solution, and the target contact ceased active maneuvering at 6:47 a.m. The submarine went to maximum depth and began an emergency evasion profile, abandoning its firing position. The second contact received its Mk-54 engagement at 6:46 a.m. and made a similar evasion response. Both Type 093s exited the engagement zone without achieving torpedo release. The Virginia-class submarine running ahead of the group on the approach corridor detected a third Type 093 contact at 6:38 a.m. A contact the P-8 had not been tracking because it had been stationary at maximum depth, its acoustic signature below the helicopter dipping sonar threshold. The Virginia's passive sonar had acquired it at a range of 9 nautical miles. The Virginia's commanding officer assessed the contact's position as being on a firing solution track for the carrier group if it had continued its original approach corridor. He transmitted the contact report and recommended a course adjustment. The carrier group adjusted course 12 degrees south for 8 minutes, enough to open the range from the stationary Type 093 to 14 nautical miles before resuming the western transit. The Type 093 did not maneuver. It either had not detected the group, or it had assessed the 14 nautical mile range as outside reliable torpedo engagement parameters and elected to maintain depth. The Virginia held a firing solution on it throughout. It did not fire. The rules of engagement required hostile intent demonstrated by active weapons employment. The Type 093 had not fired. The Virginia maintained contact and maintained position between the submarine and the carrier group. By 6:55 a.m., all 4 DF-21D tracks had been resolved, and all 3 Type 093 contacts had been displaced from firing positions. The group resumed its full western transit at 28 knots on bearing 285. The planned surface interdiction force, 6 Type 052D destroyers and 2 Type 055 cruisers, had been holding position in the northern strait, 43 nautical miles ahead of the carrier group's projected track. They were large, modern, well-armed surface combatants. Each Type 052D carried the HQ-9B surface-to-air missile system with a range exceeding 200 kilometers. Each Type 055 carried 112 vertical launch cells of mixed anti-ship and air defense capability. As an interdiction force, they were formidable. As a force positioned across the path of a carrier strike group, they presented the decision the PLAN Eastern Theater Command had been building toward: actually fire on a U.S. carrier group. That decision had not been made. The warning to navigation had been transmitted. The DF-21D salvo had been fired. The submarines had maneuvered. Each escalation step had failed to stop the carrier group's transit. The surface interdiction force was the next step. Firing on the carrier group would be the step after that. F/A-18E Super Hornets and F-35Cs from the carrier air wing had been airborne since 6 a.m., establishing a combat air patrol line 35 nautical miles ahead of the group. The strike aircraft were not armed for maritime surface engagement. They were armed for air superiority. The message was architecturally precise. The U.S. was not threatening the PLAN surface force. It was preventing the PLAN's airborne assets from interfering with the transit. The carrier air wing was not the offensive arm of this operation. Its presence was the boundary. The PLAN surface force activated its fire control radars at 7:04 a.m., a signal detectable by every U.S. electronic intelligence asset in the theater, transmitted immediately to the carrier flag bridge. Fire control radar activation was not weapons release. It was the step before weapons release. It was also the step that the carrier group's rules of engagement identified as requiring an active defensive response. The EA-18G Growler electronic warfare package, which had been operating at reduced output since 6 a.m. to avoid telegraphing its full capability, activated at full power at 7:05 a.m. The PLAN surface forces' fire control radar emissions were simultaneously jammed across their primary and secondary frequencies. The HQ-9B engagement solutions being generated on the Type 052D fire control systems degraded within 40 seconds of the Growler activation. The radar operators switched to backup frequencies. The Growler followed each switch within 8 seconds. The cycle repeated 4 times. By 7:07 a.m., the PLAN Surface Forces Fire Control Radar was operating at significantly degraded effectiveness against the carrier group's position. They could detect the group on their search radars. They could not generate reliable fire control solutions against it. At 7:09 a.m., the PLAN Eastern Theater Command transmitted a second warning to navigation. This one was addressed not to the carrier group but to INDOPACOM, a command-to-command communication through the established emergency deconfliction channel that both sides had agreed to maintain for exactly this category of situation. The communication stated that the Maritime Security Zone remained in effect and that the Eastern Theater Command had authorized the use of all necessary measures to enforce it. INDOPACOM's response, transmitted at 7:11 a.m., stated that the United States did not recognize the Maritime Security Zone, that the carrier group was conducting lawful freedom of navigation operations in international waters, and that any interference with the carrier group's transit would be treated as an act of aggression against a U.S. military formation. The communication was exchanged in 4 minutes. The carrier group continued its transit throughout. At 7:14 a.m., the PLAN Surface Force began a course change, not toward the carrier group but away from it. The 6 Type 052D destroyers and 2 Type 055 cruisers turned northeast on a course that opened the range from the carrier's projected track at a rate that would create a minimum separation of 11 nautical miles within 22 minutes. They were not withdrawing from the strait. They were repositioning out of the immediate confrontation geometry. The distinction was precise and deliberate. The carrier group passed through the position the PLAN Surface Force had vacated at 7:38 a.m. The precise geographic point in the northern Taiwan Strait where the interdiction force had been holding for 68 hours. The carrier was now inside the Maritime Security Zone on a westbound transit toward Taiwan's eastern port approaches. At 7:44 a.m., the first commercial tanker, a Liberian-flagged crude carrier that had been holding position 180 nautical miles east of Taiwan since the Maritime Security Zone declaration, received a message from its owner that the passage was authorized to proceed. The tanker altered course toward the strait at 7:46 a.m. The cost of the transit was not zero. The DF-21D engagement had consumed 11 SM-3 and SM-6 interceptors across the 4 tracks, an average of 2.75 interceptors per DF-21D due to the mid-course maneuver requiring a 2-round terminal engagement on the 4th track. The destroyer that had managed the mid-course engagement sequence had expended 67% of its SM-3 ready load. The ASW engagement had consumed 4 Mk-54 torpedoes across 2 submarine contacts. The Growler electronic warfare package had operated at full power for 14 minutes, a timeline that accelerated the maintenance cycle for 2 of the system's primary jamming transmitters, requiring scheduled maintenance before the next operational sortie. One F-35C from the carrier air wing had experienced a hydraulic fault during its combat air patrol cycle at 7:02 a.m. and had been directed to an emergency recovery aboard the carrier. The recovery was uneventful. The aircraft was assessed as recoverable within 4 hours. Its pilot had not been in a threat engagement. The plan's response to the transit, which would be studied as a precedent in every strategic planning cell from Beijing to Washington, was a careful calibration that attempted to demonstrate both capability and restraint simultaneously. The DF-21D launch demonstrated that the PLAN was willing to employ its anti-ship ballistic missile inventory against a U.S. carrier group in a live engagement. The surface force course change demonstrated that the plan was not willing to initiate a direct naval engagement against U.S. surface combatants in contested waters when the electronic warfare environment had degraded its fire control solutions. The Type 093 submarines' failure to achieve firing positions before the ASW package displaced them demonstrated that the PLAN's underwater warfare capability, while significant, had encountered a U.S. anti-submarine architecture that had been specifically designed to deny exactly the engagement geometry they needed. 3 capabilities tested. 3 results assessed. The transit had generated more tactical intelligence about plan operational doctrine in 79 minutes than the previous 3 years of observation had produced. At 8:36 a.m., the carrier group reached a position 40 nautical miles east of Taiwan's Keeling port, inside the Maritime Security Zone by every definition the plan had published, in international waters by every definition UNCLOS established. The group held position. The carrier's flight deck cycled its combat air patrol aircraft on standard rotation. The flag bridge logged the position and transmitted a status report to Indopacom. Indopacom forwarded the status report to the Pentagon at 8:38 a.m. 4 words in the subject line: Freedom of navigation achieved. At 9:15 a.m., the PLAN Eastern Theater Command announced a modification to the Maritime Security Zone. The exclusion boundary was revised from 200 nautical miles to 50 nautical miles, a reduction that opened the approaches to Taiwan's principal ports to commercial traffic while maintaining a nominal enforcement zone close to the island. The modification was not announced as a capitulation. It was announced as a scheduled adjustment consistent with the zone's stated objectives. The language was precise. The effect was unambiguous. The Liberian-flagged tanker entered the strait at 9:40 a.m. It was the first commercial vessel to transit in 71 hours. 3 more were behind it. Time from Carrier Group Western Transit commencement to Maritime Security Zone modification: 3 hours, 14 minutes. Plan weapons employed: 4 DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missiles from Fujian Province. Type 093 submarine maneuvering to torpedo release positions. 2 contacts displaced before achieving firing solution. 1 contact maintained at maximum depth, non-firing. Plan surface force, fire control, radar activation, no weapons release. Total kinetic weapons released by PLAN, 4 DF-21D. DF-21D intercept rate 100%, 3 mid-course, 1 terminal phase following mid-course maneuver. Type 093 submarine engagements, 2 contacts displaced by Mk-54ASW torpedoes before achieving firing solution. 1 contact held under Virginia-class tracking, no weapons release required. U.S. munitions expended, 11 SM-3 and SM-6 interceptors across 4 DF-21D engagements. 4 Mk-54 lightweight torpedoes against 2 submarine contacts. U.S. assets: 1. F-35C hydraulic fault, uneventful recovery, 4-hour maintenance turnaround. 1 destroyer SM-3 ready load at 33%. Resupply required within operational cycle. No personnel injuries. Carrier flight operations uninterrupted throughout transit. Plan outcome: Maritime Security Zone enforcement untenable against U.S. carrier group in freedom of navigation posture. Zone boundary modified from 200 to 50 nautical miles at 9:15 a.m. Commercial shipping resumed. Assessment: U.S. operational objective achieved. Freedom of navigation in international waters demonstrated against plan enforcement posture. Plan strategic objective: Taiwan economic isolation through maritime interdiction, not sustained beyond 71 hours. Petroleum reserve depletion timeline did not reach decision threshold. The carrier group had not been positioned because the situation required a carrier group. It had been positioned because without one, the Maritime Security Zone remained in effect, and 19 days became 18 and then 17. The carrier group's presence had not ended the plan's capability to declare a maritime security zone. It had demonstrated the cost of enforcing one against a U.S. formation. That demonstration was the operation. The transit was the message. The message had been received. The Liberian-flagged tanker cleared the 50 nautical mile zone boundary at 11:07 a.m. and entered the channel toward Keelung. The carrier group held its position 40 nautical miles to the east. The flag bridge watch officer logged the tanker's transit time and closed the operational log for the morning watch. The next watch opened it 4 hours later.